Hi everyone, it's Frugal here. As always, I have my coffee because otherwise somebody might just get killed. So let's talk today about the difference between a small business and a startup. So yes, I know there are many opinions out there and many people say that it's basically the same thing, but there are some distinct differences and similarities. So let's start with some of the similarities. Both of these are businesses. They are trying to make money. So sometimes a startup would want to make it later, whereas small businesses earlier, but both the aim is to make money. They also both have a form of a business plan or a strategy, or they neither could have one. It really depends on the business. But generally, for businesses, they would have a business plan of sorts. Now let's look a little bit at the differences. A small business can be a family business or something small. It can also be something that they want to grow and become large. But generally, when it comes to businesses, and small businesses specifically, what I find is that it is normally just a day-to-day thing and they just want to, make enough money and grow a little. When it comes to a startup, startups want to scale and they want to basically utilize what people call economies of scale. So a startup tends to go and say, listen, we want to keep our costs extremely low and go extremely big. So you would find that with some of the tech startups, especially because your hardware costs tend to be really low and you can service a lot more people without that much extra cost. Because of this economies of scale, it just means that a startup makes a lot more money. Generally also then, for a small business, or what you would find is that they would go to a bank for funding and they would normally have some form of assets that they put down as collateral. But a startup does not necessarily have that. So with both of these, you would find early on they might get funding from friends, family, and people, just to get the business going. But this isn't always the case. What you would find, for example, in a small business, like I said, they go to the bank, they go to friends, they fund it, they make it a little bit, so that they can scale. So for example, something like a shoe business where they sell shoes. So what they basically do then is they go and they're like, okay, I've got shoes, I need to find buyers, I need more stock, so please can you give me money to buy stock? That is attempts to be a small business because, the more stock they have, the more they can sell, but also there are still overheads. There's only that much that you're going to be able to bring down the price of your shoes. When it comes to a startup, what you would find is that people would then say, listen, I'm building something, for example, a piece of software, a mobile app, and I upload it once and I can scale it up into infinity depending on how many customers I get, and the cost just is really, really low. But also concerning the funding model for it, what they tend to do is work quite a bit different. So startups, on the other hand, can't really go to banks. So what they do is they've got different ways. Generally, in my opinion, what I find is that they first go to people such as friends, family, and they first get money from them. Then the next step would be they get buy-in. Sometimes they've got a step in between as well where they get buy-in and give shares to employees and people close by. And they basically tell them, listen, we'll give you shares in the company and then you just work for free. On the next step would be then seed rounds, and basically it goes from A all the way up, and when you start hitting F, then it means that you've really made a bit of a blunder. Generally, you don't have a lot of seed funding rounds or a lot of funding rounds. Seed funding rounds obviously generally the first thing, and then funding rounds from there. But as soon as you hit around like 5 or 6 of these, you need to start asking questions unless you seriously have a good business model. So what that would mean is you have what they call a pitch deck. You'll have this little piece of this presentation, and you would then display and send this to VCs or to angel investors that that basically would look at it, and then they'll have a conversation with you, and you need to prove that you basically will be able to scale this company and make lots of money. With startups, there's 2 questions that you need to answer. Number 1, can I make money from this? Are people willing to pay for it? And then the second one is, am I able to scale it? And is the market sizable? When it comes to a small business, this isn't necessarily that important, like the scaling part of it. So the scaling might be, listen, I now have, let's for example say 100 clients, whereas when it comes to a startup, you say I'm looking for 100 million clients or many, many, many clients. That is the difference between a startup and a small business, where a startup would go from 0 to £1 billion, and the investors, the VCs, the angel investors and those people, they expect not like, if, for example, if they fund for $100 million, for $100,000, they're not expecting $1 million. They're expecting $1 billion company. That is generally the expectations. Whereas if you get funding from a small business perspective, they're like, if they double their money, they're like, oh, well, that's really nice, and we quite like that. So generally what I find is that the tech field tends to just work really well when it comes to startups because of the scaling factor. Yes, I know that a lot of people will go and say like, yes, but okay, but they're really sort of similar. Yes, there are certain places where they are quite similar, but they're also extremely different. So as long as you keep in mind that it's not necessarily the same thing, and like when it comes to startups, they tend to work in incubation hubs as well, whereas small businesses tend to just network and friends and do business in that sense. So yes, big differences, small differences, some overlap, but generally that's about how it goes. Now that you know more about startups and small businesses, have a wonderful day and happy investing.